This is Stick. He's sitting at a cold government desk, sweating, under a sign that reads, Parenthood Licensing Bureau. New law just passed. The rule is simple. Before you can have a child, you must pass a test. No test, no baby. A permit for the most human thing there is. It sounds, at first, almost sensible. And that reasonable feeling is exactly the trap we're going to walk into today. On purpose. Carefully. So, what if you really did need to pass a psychological test to have a kid? Let's take the idea seriously, then follow it all the way down. Here's the case for it, played completely straight. Because, honestly, it starts strong. Look at everything else we already make people qualify for. You need a license to drive a car, to fly a plane, to be a doctor, in many places even to adopt a child or to own certain pets. And yet, the single hardest, highest stakes job on Earth, raising an entire human being from scratch, needs no qualification whatsoever. Anyone can just do it. We test a stranger before trusting them with a 2-ton car, but a whole new person? No check at all. Even Stick admits that's a little strange. And the stakes really are enormous, because a childhood doesn't stay in the childhood. It ripples outward for a lifetime and often into the next generation. A child raised with warmth tends to carry that forward. A child raised in fear or neglect often carries that forward too. The pattern echoes down the years. So the pitch lands like this. If we could spare even some kids a broken start, shouldn't we? Shouldn't people have to prove they're ready?
It sounds compassionate. It sounds responsible. And if you feel yourself nodding along right now, good. Hold on to that feeling. We're going to need it later.
So let's actually build the thing. What would a parenting test even measure? Stick steps up to the first station to find out.
First, a psychological screening. Personality profiles, mental health history, emotional stability. Then the practical checks. Stable income, adequate housing, a clean criminal record.
Then the hard part, a simulation. Screaming baby at 3 a.m., a tantrum in a supermarket, a sick toddler and no sleep. Can you keep your cool? Stick sweats through all of it. And at the end, the examiner picks up the stamp. Approved or denied. Your future family decided at a desk. And you can picture the shiny brochure version. Every child planned, wanted, and arriving into a stable, ready, screened, and approved home. No more kids born to parents who genuinely couldn't cope. Fewer broken starts. On paper, in a brochure, it looks almost like a kindness. This is the strongest the idea will ever look. So before we take one more step, sit with it. It really does sound reasonable. That's the whole danger. Because now we have to ask the question the brochure never does. Who decides who passes, and what happens to everyone who doesn't? So here's the turn. The moment you let a government decide who is allowed to reproduce, you are no longer talking about parenting classes. You're talking about eugenics. Eugenics is the idea that we improve humanity by controlling who gets to have children. And here's what matters most today. It is not hypothetical. We are not imagining a dark future. We are describing something the 20th century already did, widely, deliberately, and with the full force of law. So let's stop imagining and look at what actually happened when real states decided some people were unfit to reproduce. Stick puts the permit down. This part isn't funny. The United States, 1927. A woman named Carrie Buck was ordered sterilized against her will. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. The court upheld it. Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote the notorious line, 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. The highest court in the land endorsing this. It was not a fringe idea. Roughly 60,000 or more Americans were sterilized without their consent. The poor, the disabled, those labeled feeble-minded. Programs ran into the 1970s. And it wasn't only America. Sweden, often held up as a model of decency, ran its own state sterilization programs, also into the 1970s. This was mainstream policy. The people who ran these programs believed they were being responsible, scientific, kind even. They filled in forms and stamped them approved. Sound familiar? And this logic has a bottom. Nazi Germany took the same idea. Some lives are fit, some are not, and built its machinery of mass murder on it. That is the far end of who deserves to reproduce. It is the most catastrophic warning history has ever handed us about where this road goes. And it isn't only the distant past. China's one-child policy from 1980 to 2015 meant the state controlling reproduction at scale, including forced abortions and sterilizations. The results echo still: a skewed sex ratio with millions of missing girls and a population now aging faster than almost any in history. Every one of these started with a sentence that sounded responsible. Some people just shouldn't have children. The exact sentence our shiny brochure was built on. So the premise isn't neutral. Given real power, it has always pointed the same direction. Now, who exactly would be holding the stamp?
Because someone has to write this test. Someone has to decide the passing score. And every test ever made quietly encodes the biases of whoever wrote it.
What counts as a stable personality? Whose culture is the default? How much income is enough? Every answer smuggles in a judgment about what a normal life looks like. So who fails? Not the bad people, the poor, the disabled, the neurodivergent, the single parent, anyone whose life doesn't match the examiner's narrow idea of right. These aren't unfit parents. They're the people who don't fit the form, and a test can't tell the difference. It only measures how closely you resemble whoever built it. Handed the power to deny someone a family, a test doesn't find bad parents. It finds people who are different, and it calls that a result. But grant the best case. The test is written by kind, careful, brilliant scientists. Here's the deeper problem. The thing it measures can't actually be measured. Because no reliable test predicts who will be a good parent. Psychology cannot forecast that from a profile. The science just isn't there, and may never be. In fact, the research points the other way. The psychologist Donald Winnicott gave us the phrase that undoes the whole premise: the good enough parent. Kids don't need perfect, optimized, high-scoring parents. They need someone who shows up, keeps trying, and loves them. Warmth and effort beat every measurable trait. And children are astonishingly resilient. Given a little love and stability, they cope with a lot. The test would reject people who'd have been wonderful and never know it. Let it get personal for one moment. Picture a person this test would obviously fail. Not enough money, a rocky past, the wrong answers on a form. And yet, that same person would have been a fierce, devoted parent, would have shown up every night, would have loved that kid with everything they had. Under this rule, that parent never gets the chance, and that child simply never gets to exist at all, quietly filtered out before they ever had a name. That's the real weight of a veto over who gets born. Not a statistic, one specific person who'd have been loved erased by a checkbox. Stick lets it sit, then steps back. There's also a line this premise crosses that we treat as sacred. The choice to have a child is one of the most personal decisions a person ever makes. Reproductive freedom, control over your own body, is recognized as a fundamental human right. A licensing test hands that right to a committee to grant or to refuse. But wait, says Stick, we already vet people to adopt and foster. Isn't that the same thing? Good question. It's the strongest objection, and it's worth answering fairly. The difference is real. Adoption is about placing an existing child, one who already needs a home, into safe care. That's protecting someone who's already here. A parenting license does the opposite. It reaches back before anyone exists and forbids someone's own child from ever being born. Vetting a home is not vetoing a life. Now, push the premise to its logical end. A whole society where existence itself requires a permit, where the state holds a veto over who is even born.
Every birth pre-approved. Every family pre-screened. The unfit quietly edited out of the population, generation by generation, until they're simply gone.
It would look clean, orderly, efficient. Everyone remaining would match the profile perfectly, and something enormous and human would have been erased to get there. A world with no wrong answers left, because everyone who might have given one was never allowed to arrive. Not a safe world, a sordid one. This is where the reasonable-sounding brochure actually leads. Stick picks his permit back up and finally looks at it properly. So here's where Stick lands. And be fair to the instinct behind all this. The urge to spare kids a bad childhood is real and kind. It's not the problem. The problem is the tool. You cannot license love. No test measures whether you'll get up at 3 a.m. for a tiny stranger who screams for a living. And no one, no committee, no state, no algorithm should ever hold a veto over who gets to exist. History was extremely clear about how that ends. The honest fix was never a gate at the start. It's support along the way. You don't ban struggling parents, you help them. Childcare, money, care. A hand, not a stamp. One path sorts people at the door and calls it safety. The other walks beside them and calls it care. Only one of them ever spared a single actual child. And Stick? He takes the test, sweats through the simulation, and the stamp comes down. Approved, certified to raise a human being. And holding the permit, he feels nothing he didn't feel before. Because the test measured his income, his answers, his blood pressure in a chair, it measured nothing about whether he'll love the kid at 3 a.m., nothing that actually matters. That, in the end, he'd have to just decide, and keep deciding every single day. No stamp can grant it, and no bureau can take it away. So, should you need to pass a test to have a kid? The instinct is kind, the idea is dangerous, and history already told us exactly where it goes. You can't license love, you can only offer it, and help other people offer it too. Stick clocks out of the Parenthood Bureau, and just goes home. Stick life. Next time, what if the safest place on Earth was Chernobyl?